Good evening. Welcome to Sheffield Hallam University Space and Place Group session number 2 in the series Perceiving Climate Change. This evening's focus being upon all things wet and wonderful. I'm Luke Bennett and I'm going to be your chair for this evening. So without further ado, I believe that I've opened the waiting room and everybody subsequent should get coming through. If colleagues could just keep an eye on the waiting room to check there's nobody actually stranded in the waiting room, that would be great. This evening there will be 4 main presentations, that is 4 proper presentations after my waffle. The event will finish by 9:30. Please do raise any comments or questions via the chat as we go along. As you'll see from this slide, this series is being run by the Space and Place Group at Sheffield Hallam, but this particular series is also being co-promoted and hosted by the Royal Geographical Society Yorkshire and North East Committee, which is my cue for inviting my exotic colleague. He's exotic because he's in Turkey at the moment. John Bridge, do you want to say anything? Well, you do want to say something, so now's your chance.
Thanks, Luke. I'll keep it very short. I just want to welcome everyone this evening on behalf of the RGS Yorkshire and North East Group, and to thank Luke and the other speakers in advance for putting on this evening's seminar, and I hope you all enjoy it. Thanks, Luke.
Thank you very much. Thank you. As it says in the remainder of this slide, this event is being recorded, and it's being recorded with the intention of what I call a raw upload. It's not a live upload, but I'm hoping not to have to edit the recording, and therefore what I say to everyone involved, please, is if you make a contribution, please be aware that it will be recorded. If you make a contribution in some form that you then deeply regret within the next 24 hours, please contact me and I'll reluctantly, but will do an edit to remove your unwanted contribution if that's what you request. Please contact me on the email that is shown there, the slightly mysterious sounding Dr. Luke Bennett 13 address. That is because I've been having some problems with my Sheffield Hallam email account today, because I leave Sheffield Hallam tomorrow and they've already started turning off various of my facilities. So you need to use the Luke Bennett 13 address if you want to contact me in those terms. So I will remain associated with the university in an emeritus capacity, and therefore this Perceiving Climate Change series will continue to run for the remainder of this year under my steerage. And Sheffield Space and Place Group events may well continue under my steerage even into future calendar years. But anyway, that's enough about me. This evening's event is also taking place as a sort of an adjunct part of the Festival of Debate, which is a series of events being run across the city over the next 3 or 4 weeks. And I'm delighted that we have Alban as one of our speakers, and Alban, you may well want to say something about Festival of Debate and the organisation that runs Festival of Debate when you introduce yourself and give us your talk. On behalf of the Sheffield Hallam University Space and Place Group, we've been running interdisciplinary and playful sessions for a good 10+ years now, and since COVID we've been running them online, which has given us the benefit of being able to record them. So we now have a YouTube site which has a compendium of all sorts of different thematic talks with all sorts of very interesting contributors, generating all sorts of productively weird interdisciplinary concoctions over recent years, and I commend that to you. You'll see that there's a QR code when the recording is uploaded. Of course, you can pick off the QR codes that I've embedded in this set of slides in that fashion. This is our second event, water. Our first event, ice. The recording's up online. And we have our third event in June, looking at the topic from the point of view of heat. And our thoughts for our final event in the autumn in November have coalesced recently, and they're now subtitling that education. We have 4 speakers who will be announced pretty soon in relation to that. So the title of the series is Perceiving Climate Change. My proposition being that we are often trying to engage with the issue of climate change in a vicarious manner through subtle cues and indirect processes of meaning making. And therefore, I thought if we took it in an elemental direction, thinking about ice from various interdisciplinary perspectives, thinking about water, thinking about heat and so forth, and always thinking, how is it that we come to know, discuss, debate, argue about the phenomenon of climate change through these subtle environmental cues that we encounter within space and within place in our daily lives or in our other than daily lives. So that's the connecting theme. And this evening, the angle of attack, as it were, is in relation to how we perceive climate change and also how we perceive water as an entity in and of itself with agency out there in the environment. This slide just recaps what we looked at in terms of ice. I'm not going to go through, but what we're trying to do each time is blend science, cultural perspectives, indigenous perspectives of those who are working with or living with these environmental factors. And just a little glance ahead to the next session in June. We have 4 speakers for that, a pair of speakers thinking from the point of view of how buildings react to heat, an artist thinking about how we perceive and represent and demonstrate relationships to warmth within domestic life, a historian who's been looking at the histories of the transition to central heating and what that might tell us about transitions towards sort of post-carbon futures. And then we've got a climate researcher joining us to talk about heat waves and the perception, both embodied and statistical, of heat waves and their significance. So another event to look forward to. But for tonight, we are getting wet. And so we're going to run through 4 presentations in this order. The last presentation is a recorded presentation from Andre Kong. I've watched it. It's brilliant, so it's worth sticking around for. All the other ones are going to be brilliant too, but I'm just, teeing up the recorded presentation for the end. So with no further comment from me, that's what's in store. I'm really looking forward to it. Hope you are too. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to invite Mel to step to the virtual podium and present her talk.
Thank you so much, Luke. I am now going to do some filler words while I share my screen, which hopefully you can see as a full screen.
Yeah, looking good.
Thanks, guys. It's always really good when the technology we practice for everyone enjoyed works. Right, so yes, thank you very much. I'm really excited to be the first talk up. I feel that we sort of, I'm representing science in Luke's interdisciplinary world. I'm representing science. I'm sure lots of other people will do as well. So our talk is entitled Nature's Witness, Using Citizen Science to Monitor Flood Management in the Era of Climate Change. And as you can see from our first slide, we're taking a very interdisciplinary approach and having lots of partners to answer this question. So the first thing we need to do is I need to introduce everybody who has been involved in this project thus far. I'm going to introduce myself and Jade, as we are from the university, Sheffield Hallam University, and then I'll be passing over to Jackie. So hi everybody, I'm Mel. I am an associate professor. I sit in the Department of Biosciences and Chemistry. I do work, I'm primarily a microbiologist by trade, and I am progressing into the world of environmental science, looking at the impact of pollution on microbes that live within watercourses, and I'm also keenly interested in citizen science and public engagement. Jade is one of the students in our department, and she's going to introduce herself in more detail in a couple of slides' time. So now I'm going to pass over to Jackie, please.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jackie Lowe from the Environment Agency, and I'm here tonight to, well, I'm representing the partners in the project that we're going to talk about. So that was Sheffield City Council, Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust, and the Environment Agency. And within that, Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust enlisted Sheffield Hallam University to help with the design and monitoring and subsequent analysis from our project. So I'm just going to be here to give a bit of context and background, and then obviously we'll move on to Mel and Jade. So Mel, could you move on the slides, please? Thank you. I probably don't need to explain to people here about why we're here, the climate and nature emergencies that are unfolding around us. I've just noticed, and I'm not taking responsibility for it, but it says increased flooding twice on that slide, but I didn't write it.
Oh, you know, it's
all right. Yeah, I'll look away. I'll look at something else.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
it's fine. Flooding is becoming more frequent, more severe. Climate change is making this worse. We're expecting within the Don catchment, which is South Yorkshire and part of North East Derbyshire, where the Rother starts, flows in rivers to go up by 20 to 50%, depending on different climate change scenarios. In the last 16 years, we've suffered 3 very severe floods in that Don catchment, the type of floods that we'd normally describe as once in a generation. In South Yorkshire, there are over 24,000 properties currently at risk of flooding. And on top of that, for every property that's flooded or every person that's affected, 16 further people are impacted. So likewise, droughts are becoming more severe and frequent. Pollution in rivers is increased during flood events because of, combined sewer overflows and surface water flooding, and biodiversity crisis. The latest State of Nature report says that UK species have declined by 19% since 1970. 16% of UK species are threatened with extinction, and since 1500, 10,000 of our species are already extinct. So it's quite frightening. So the organisations that are responsible for managing flood risk in South Yorkshire have been developing the Source to Sea nature-based solutions programme to complement the traditional flood management schemes. And the project that you're going to hear about tonight is part of that Source to Sea programme. Next slide, please. So sorry, I've just lost my place again then. So we're using the Source to Sea programmes using a working with natural processes approach to mitigate climate and nature emergencies. Natural flood management, which is my area, is just one subset of nature-based solutions, which is part of this working with natural processes approach. Whilst it's flood driven, so a lot of the funding we get comes from flood funding, there's many other benefits. So the type of interventions that we put in increase biodiversity, they can improve water quality, they can absorb carbon, and multiple social benefits. The purpose of natural flood management in above Sheffield, where we put this project in, the Limb Brook project, is to hold and slow the flow of water in that upper catchment, to delay the peak flow downstream during storm events. So yes, thank you, sorry. So effectively what we're wanting to do in this type of a catchment, which is in the uplands, is during heavy rainfall, we're wanting to just hold more of that water in the environment. Most of it will still make its way down, but it'll be a little bit later so that all that water's not arriving in the same place at the same time. So we're trying to flatten that graph there, that peak flow, so it's not all arriving at the same time, causing flooding. So the Limb Brook nature-based solutions demonstrator, as I said before, it's a collaboration between Sheffield City Council, the Environment Agency, and Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust. And the type of interventions that we put in upland environments are demonstrated here. So in the small subcatchment that goes down to eventually to the sheaf, the river sheaf, We put in 18 attenuation ponds at Lady Canning's plantation and Werlow playing fields. Put in swales between these ponds to guide the water through the pond system rather than it rushing through what was there before, which was like field drainage on the playing fields. We've put in over 50 leaky dams along the course of the Limb Brook. So these are just small natural type structures where we've put in woody debris, usually logs and then some brash, and that just so usually the water will just flow naturally through those, but when there's a lot of rainfall or snow melt, it starts to, and the flows go a bit higher, that starts to capture some of that. And another method that we've used there is on some of the very steep-sided parts of the valley, the council had to fell trees due to, I think there were larch trees there due to disease. So we placed a lot of the logs cross contour just to slow that flow of overland flow downstream. Another thing that we put in there with Sheffield Hallam's University's help was some hydrological monitoring and some citizen science fixed point photography posts, which we're going to go on to speak to about now. So they've been collecting information for the last 2.5 years. I think it's over to you now.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you, Jackie. So I got involved in this project because I was having a chat to Jackie at a Rivers Trust event, and she told me about these photos that people had emailed in, and that idea just lived in my head rent free for ages. Like, how do you analyze this data? Like, as scientists, and I'm sure John's going to start nodding in a minute, we like numbers, don't we, John? We like this is the amount of rainfall, and this is the number, and this is what goes up, and so how can we use these photos that the public are engaging with to help collect evidence that's going to help demonstrate that natural flood management is a really good way to slow the flow and will have an impact downstream? Because obviously the more that we can show that it's working, the more likely you are to get more funding, and the more likely you are to get more funding, the more flood management we can do, and then it's like really good, and we're working with nature to try and mitigate the impact of climate change rather than work against it. So here is a picture of the catchment, so of the Limb Brook. So if people are familiar with Sheffield, I'm sure you're doing what I did when I looked at this picture and trying to figure out where the Norfolk Arms is. So the Norfolk Arms is here. This is Lady Canning's at the top. If you go out here, I'm pointing at the wrong screen. This is Norfolk Park here. This is Lady Canning's, as the name suggests. This is you go out towards the moors like Burbage and Stanage and the like are over here. This is the Limb Brook, and then we go down here, a word of playing fields, and down here is Ecclesall Woods. Now, full disclosure, I didn't make this map. I have this map as a JPEG file, not as anything I can move around. And some of these little dots are in the wrong place. So 8 is down here in Werlow playing fields, and 11 is down here in Ecclesall Woods. So please be aware of that as you look at some of our graphs later on, and you're like, some of these aren't in the right place. It's just because some of the posts got mislabeled. I think there might have been some moving around of plans. So this is where these photo posts are. So what's happened is members of the public have been invited to take pictures of elements of the natural flood management strategy that, as Jackie said, the collaborators put in place. And what we want to do is we wanted to analyse them. So obviously funding is tight. How do you find people to do this? And I was like, I know, guys. We have at Sheffield Hallam loads of really awesome students that love this kind of thing. So I was like, hi, Jade, you're my project student. Let's do some of this. So now I'm going to let Jade introduce herself, and she's going to run through some of the results that she's found from her this is right at the start of the project. So what she's found in her project about these posts and how reliable they are and what data we've got. So Jade, over to you, my lovely. And if you just shout at me, I will click on to the next slide.
So well, hello. I'm Jade, as Mel's just introduced me, a final year student at Hallam. And this is my research project, basically. So with the photos that have been submitted by the public, I've currently been going through them to find what's the quality of them for the suitability, whether they can be analysed or not. And we've found that between May 2020 and 2023 of May, there is 2,660 photos all submitted by the public. And going through those, I've reviewed them, and some of them are time stamped and some of them aren't. So I've further and analyse those ones to find the quality of those two, of which there's 604 photos that are not time and date stamped. Then there's the 525 of those that have a good quality, but they can't be analysed because we don't know the date or the time, so it's not suitable. And then obviously here, over the whole 12 months, we've got 21% that 21 71% of photos that we have been able to analyze and pop into graphs and tables, which we'll see later on. Yeah, next slide, please. So with regards to the posts, we've looked at the engagement of the public based on where they are. So here, as Mel's just explained, Lady Canning's plantation is very popular for mountain bikers, dog walkers. So we would expect a higher amount of people to go there. And then this one here, which Mel's pointing to, is where you see a lot of running. So with also quite a high population for the footfall of people. And then Willow Playing Fields is also very popular, where you'll find a lot of people playing sports, walking dogs. And then we have Ecclesall Woods, which is obviously a very known spot for walking dogs. Next slide, please. So here are the graphs that we've produced from the data, and you can see for each area there is a big fluctuation in the amount of images that we've been able to analyze. So as you can see at Lady Canning's plantation, there it does post 4 is pretty much barely any photos. I think there was 18 in total. So you can see that that is quite a low amount. So that's not situated in a great place for the citizens to take the photos compared to, say, Ecclesall Woods, where we've got a lot of photos for every post. And you can also see that it does dip in certain areas based on probably winter, which would probably want more people to take photos of, because that's when there's higher amounts of storms and flooding. So it's whether that's feasible for that time of year. So because it's Ecclesall Woods there, December, it's dipped a bit there.
Cool. Would you like the next slide?
Yes, please. Yeah. So the overall question of what we want in from the posts is what the water levels tell us. So the retention ponds, with the photos, we can see whether the ponds are low in water, and then when there's after a storm or some rainfall, we can see that actually the retention ponds have risen, so they're doing their job, they're doing what we're wanting them to do. And similar with the leaky dams, it shows the water levels of those, the river downstream. Some of the leaky dams are not in line with the photo posts, it's further downstream. So we can see the water levels more on those ones. We can also note the vegetation growth, so the biodiversity of the vegetation around has risen compared to before, especially with the playing fields where there's site 8, the posts. So the pond was originally unfenced, and we can see that there is no noticeable changes in the biodiversity of the vegetation, whereas compared to the fenced ponds, they have more vegetation around. So there's the dogs and children and things that have effects on the vegetation around, which obviously we're wanting to work with nature and increase the biodiversity as well as the nature-based solutions. Next one, here we are, slide 9. So this is post 9, where, as you can see, the water levels are risen. So we can see that the water levels are rising. And then we can see that the you can see a visible change, and a cute little dog, a visible change in the ponds. So there's a week apart, and between that week there had been a lot of rainfall, which beforehand would have run across the field, whereas now it has built up in this pond and been retained, showing that it's doing the job. Next slide, please. So here we have the leaky dam. As I mentioned earlier, some of the posts are not situated near the leaky dam, so it may have been more efficient to place it at the leaky dam rather than further downstream, because you can see the effects more. Obviously we can tell here on the first photo the water level changing. Yeah, but that's about it for that slide. Next, please.
Yeah. No, that's lovely, Jade. Thank you very much. So Jade's been working really hard going through all the pictures, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her feelings about this later on, and yeah, her sort of overall views. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how the citizen science and how the public contributing to sort of observing these changes in the river and the water levels and the retention of the water, and how those photos can be used to show that some of those elements are working really well. So as Jackie said, this is something that natural flood management is something that we want to do more of, ideally, because we're working with nature rather than against it. And also you have loads of additional benefits. Not only are you slowing the flow of water, you're preventing flooding, but you're also increasing biodiversity, you're also increasing carbon sequestration, etc. So what we thought we'd do was sort of have like a SWOT analysis, which as a scientist isn't normally what I do, but hey, here we are. And so I chatted to Jackie and our other collaborators and Jade about these, and we came up with this learning sort of so far from where we are in the project that we can feed into other projects. And they are, okay, so what are the strengths? The strengths are these posts have had a really high level of public engagement. People are obviously really interested in the project, and they're very happy to spend, albeit not a massive amount of time, but they're willing to take some pictures and email them off to us. So that's awesome. We can observably see the levels of water changing, particularly in the attenuation ponds, but also in the rivers as well. And also this has led to us building new collaborations, and that's really nice. Like we've worked more closely with Jackie, and hopefully that is something we can carry on doing. So Jackie, obviously, I'm saying Jackie is like she's the head of the Environment Agency, Jackie and the rest of the teams involved as well. But what about the issues involved in this? Because obviously it's not all perfect. So engagement varies, as Jane has showed, by the post and the time. This isn't a replacement for personal skills. Like Jade was saying, how on some of the pictures you can see there's an increase in biodiversity, but we can't actually quantify that by the pictures. So it isn't a replacement in some terms for people being on the ground and doing more technical assessments. And there's various stakeholders involved, and there's many research questions. And in this project, for example, we only had 15 posts. So how can we get the posts to answer as many questions as possible for as many stakeholders as possible? And I think that's a weakness of the project, because people are always going to want more information. So what are the opportunities then looking forward in this project and further into other projects? So the public are involved, and that's amazing. And we can use this as a way to increase involvement and agency of the public. It's synergistic with other citizen science projects, and we can use this to inform future projects as well. Conversely, it's time expensive to audit the photos. Jade's going to nod at this point, like, yes, it is. With people moving, we're at risk of loss of institutional knowledge and strategies. And also there's the risk of the public disengaging if they're not seeing a benefit from them being involved in this project. So just before we round up, I just wanted to sort of share a personal my personal views on this project from perhaps not from a scientific point of view, but from a personal point of view. So here's a picture of somebody running, and this isn't how I look when I run, but I ran this section of the Limb Brook because I wanted to see where the photos were and posts were, and I wanted to get involved. So I ran this section, and it was really wet. I couldn't find post 8. I got very wet trying to look for it. took some pictures, submitted them. And on the way out, so this is, I ran down here, then I ran back up the road, you don't need to know this detail. Anyway, I spotted these invasive species towards the end of my run, which I took a photo of and then submitted to the invasive species trackers. Here as well, you can also see some mine water, which is iron pollutant that comes out of old mines, and it can cause loads of issues for the rivers. And I reported that on the big River Watch app. And for me, this really sort of consolidated the idea that these projects are great, but there are lots of different citizen science projects happening and lots of different people asking for information from the public. So I think we need to be quite aware of that and look at ways that we can be as synergistic as possible in enabling the public to have as much impact as they can in terms of their action. And this leads me on to the River Don project, which I know Alban is talking about next, so I'm not going to talk about that in any more detail, but also Riverfly, which do really good monitoring, really, really good scientific monitoring of our rivers. And that's another way that people can get more involved. So before I move on to Jackie, Jade, have you got any reflections about the project that you'd like to share at this point? And then I'm going to move on to Jackie. You need to mute. Yeah, good job.
Yeah, so I think, as Mel mentioned earlier about the funding, it has been a bit of a pain trying to figure out the posts, and maybe would have situated them a little bit better if we could have had more of a timescale and more of a plan behind it. But overall, it has been a really interesting project and I've enjoyed working on it. It's been really interesting to see the citizen science side of it, as well as the science, which is very much of a shock to me because I've always been science, not citizen. But yeah, I've really enjoyed it. It's great to see the engagement of the public and work alongside the Environment Agency and Sheffield Council and Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust. That's a mouthful.
It is, isn't it? So basically, we're pulling you over to the social sciences, is what you're saying. Like,
yeah.
You're like, oh, it's interesting. Oh, that's lovely. Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you, Jade. Right, over to you then, Jackie. Please can you tell us what your views are? Thank you.
Just reflections, really. I'm sure a lot of people on this call will know this feeling, but we suddenly got some funding and we had to spend it quickly in a certain time scale. So lots of the bits of the project were sort of, done with best intentions, and the citizen science fixed point photography is one of those that we put them in where we thought they'd be best, but there was a time scale that had to go in and the project had to end. So if we'd consulted more with social scientists or other people who might have been using them, yes, we would have probably placed them in slightly better places or put more in. But it was it was just a needs must thing. Sometimes you've got to spend the funding, don't you? But overall, really, I think the thing that really got Mel's attention was when I told her at this meeting that we were at that we'd got this fixed point photography and thousands of photographs coming in and we weren't doing anything with it because we didn't have any capacity to do that and we didn't have any funding to analyse it. So at that point, we're just collecting it. So I think that's what got Mel excited, really. What we like from it really is we've got, as you'll see on this slide here, we've got catchment-wide aspirations. This shows it actually shows the flood outline. So the rivers look a little bit different to normal, but it shows the river Sheaf that Sheffield gets its name from and the Porter Brook. And we've identified 4 subcatchments within that. The Limb Brook is the green one there, where we could do a lot more natural flood management. So we're hoping that some of the research and analysis that comes out of the monitoring and the citizen science that we've put in this project is going to help us build a case for more funding. It's actually very, very difficult to get flood funding for natural flood management projects because the funding mechanism wasn't set up for that type of a project. So any research ideas will be greatly welcomed.
Yeah.
That's it, I think. Thank you.
Yeah. So hopefully that has been a nice overview of what we've done with the project. So we're going to leave it there, hopefully within our 20 minutes or so. And we'd like to thank you for listening and invite any questions. Are we okay to invite questions, Luke?
Yeah, that's fine. There's a couple of points in the chat which I'm happy to sort of speak to. Probably because we've got quite a large audience, it's probably better to steer questions through the chat if people don't mind. We might have a bit of a looser approach towards the end when we're having a sort of cross-presentation discussion. So I'll steer the questions. And the first question raised sort of by two people really seems to be, what insights have you gained about what the citizens actually, the correspondence, the citizen science, what they actually think about wider issues of how well the sort of water attenuation is working, and wider issues? Are you tapping into thoughts as well as photos in any way?
So from my perspective, I am ridiculously interested in this. So I think I think citizen science is quite a loaded term, isn't it? Because I think people find the idea of being a scientist sometimes can be quite off-putting, and they find it there's quite a barrier there. And actually, are people being citizen scientists? Are only some people going to get involved if you call it citizen science? So one of the things I'd really like to do is see and understand better the thought process and the motivations for people who take their time to submit photos to things like the photo posts, and how that might differ to things like when people go and do like river walks and look for signs of pollution, and how that differs from people who work in riverfly who go and do like the very stringent kick sampling and looking at biodiversity. So very interesting research question, 100% with you. As it stands, how the photo posts have been set up, there's no, from my perspective, and obviously the university, I completely agree with, we've got very strict views on ethics, and when people have emailed their photo through, there is no indication that they're going to get me going, hi, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? What do you think about this? So at the moment, how the posts are set up, we aren't in a position, we feel, to then email those people back and go, hi, can we have a chat to you? But that's something that I would certainly want to embed in future projects if Jackie et al. Are happy for us to do that, because I think having a broader conversation with the public who have engaged in these photo posts is really important. Firstly, to see why they do it, but secondly, so we can then tell them the benefit of, like, you sent us this picture and then this is what we've changed, so we can keep them in the loop of what we've been doing, which I think is really important, so they don't just feel like they're submitting things and them not being acted on. I think that answers the question.
Yeah, I was just pausing there to see if anyone else wanted to come in, but that was great. There was a sort of supplemental, I think, in the chat, which was, do you sense, although you've explained why you might not be able to sense this, do you sense that people would prefer floodwaters to be channeled through and dealt with swiftly, or whether people actually prefer floodwaters to linger, but also in a controlled manner? It's an interesting sort of question. I have no view upon it, and I suspect, for all the reasons you've just said, you may not have a view on it in terms of what other people think, but maybe there's a bit of a dilemma there, I suppose, as to whether people want floodwater out of the way quickly, or they want it slowed down and therefore present for longer.
Can I give that one to you, Jackie?
I was just going to say I'll come in. Yeah, I mean, part of putting any of the citizen science there is just to engage people. We've also got interpretation boards at Lady Canning's Plantation and Worlow Playing Fields that explain natural flood management. So just by getting people to engage and see it in action, hopefully we'll be, I don't want to say educating people, but raising people's awareness. Yeah, people. For decades or hundreds of years, we've been draining places. Worlow Playing Fields is a whole load of herringbone drainage underneath it, which we, below the playing field bit part, we broke that open and made it into ponds. So it's been a great example of how we can show it working to people in a really public place. And there are times when you do want to get water past a certain point and channel it past a certain point, but higher up in the catchment, in more rural areas, we want to hold that water, really, so it's not going downstream to the to built up areas.
Yeah, thank you. The only other question I think there is left in the chat is, Obviously, today's talk is focused on the southeastern portion of the sort of river network around Sheffield. One person in the chat has said or has asked, are there any plans to do, I presume, an equivalent investigation around any of the river catchment zones in the northwest portion?
Yeah, there are. I mean, I'll come in with that. Yes, that's what I was saying at the end. We've got catchment-wide aspirations. We just can't access the funding, even our own funding within the Environment Agency, because the system's wasn't set up for it. So things may change over time, and we go for other types of funding, maybe species type funding or landscape scale funding that comes from the ELM schemes. But yeah, we've already been looking in the Loxley. I think that was in the chat there. There's quite a lot of surface water issues there.
Great, right. Well, thank you, Jackie, Mel, and Jade, for getting us off so energetically. Let's now hand the baton across to Alban.
Thank you, Luke. I presume I'm going to have to do some filler, but more than likely not as well as Mel did, so I apologise. Share my screen. Oh, would you be able to share it for me, please, Luke?
Sorry, was that was directed to me? Was it, Alban?
Yes. Yeah.
I'll probably need to make. Yeah, sorry, because you retuned in. I've got to make you.
I did.
You're a co-host, and I've got to work out how to do that. So just bear with me a moment. You explained to me that you've come in under a colleague's name, didn't you?
While these gentlemen fast, I'm just going to do a bit more filler for fun. I'd just like to take this opportunity to say I'm really proud of Jade, who, as an undergraduate student, was very apprehensive about doing this. And we had a little pep talk, and I think you did a great job. So in front of all of these people, I'm going to give you a little round of applause, Jade. Well done. Good job. We'll go clapping back.
Thank you.
Good job, Jade. Well done. Right, you've gone red. Love that. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, indeed. Alban, I think I've now given you the permission you needed.
I'm still not able to share screen, so maybe.
Are you logged in under your own name, or are you still under your colleague's name?
I changed my name, so it's Joe Chris.
Because I've got you listed under your name in the participants. Are you also in there as Joe Chris? Can't see Joe Chris.
CJ, I'm also nervous, but unfortunately for me, it looks like I've had a technical issue before I start, so that's brilliant.
Don't worry. Okay, I know what I'll do. Just won't tell everybody what I've done it, and they'll have to guess what I've done. Okay, it should work now.
In share screen. Would you confirm that? Yeah, is it up? I apologize for
your personal view, which includes your presenter notes, but now we can see your public view.
Perfect. So hopefully you've not seen too many of the notes. I know actually what I'm going to say. Right, let me do a little bit on Opus Independence because we are hosting a festive debate, so I'll just move ahead just one ever so slightly. So actually within Opus, we work to create and support responses to achieve urgent systems change. And we do this by telling stories, bringing people together and demonstrating alternatives. A large part of that is a festive debate, which we're running from mid-April to mid-May. And we're inviting people to come and have conversations, and that will be through either places in this where we're working in collaboration, or we'll be hosting our own events, our own workshops to discuss some of the issues that we currently experience and potential solutions in a collaborative way. A part of that portfolio is the River Don project. So you're going to hear a little bit more about it, but I'm going to be honest, I will focus a little bit more on the macro lens so you can understand as to the point of contact for us within this project, and it does come initially heavily from a social sciences perspective. So I will warn you with that. So let me start. So here we are with the River Don project. Thank you, Lutzer, for inviting us in this particular space. And my name is Alban Crashy, and I work for Opus Independence. I actually co-founded the River Don project, and I did that during an internship where the program was focusing around transforming and activating places so we can understand place and placemaking. And the premise of that was to work in an interdisciplinary manner. So whilst I was at work at Opus during that internship, we started to have a particular conversation on how best to use my time. And it seems like this was the answer, but nonetheless, the particular question and query that we had is, how do we look at upstream solutions? And when the topic of contention is climate change, the question of perception is actually quite important. So if we're taking today's topic in a sense of perceiving climate change, well, climate does change and it will change, and hopefully it will continue to change in a predictable way. However, if you reframe that into climate breakdown, that provides a very different perception. So trying to highlight its language is incredibly important, and it can change our initial understanding and perception of that. So you also have to bear with me a little bit, because a lot of the language that I will use, we are learning, and it is an iterative process of our understanding of rights of nature. So who we are as a collective? Well, actually, within this particular project, we've got quite a few partners, as you can see underneath. So both the universities, the Sustainability Centre, Don Catchment Rivers Trust, Lawyers for Nature and Sheffield Data for Good. And this is only at present because we're just building that ecosystem, and we're still at the very early stages. We at Opus don't believe that you can do system change unless you think differently about governance and ensure an interdisciplinary approach. So Mel, who presented a little bit earlier, she's actually working with us at the River Don project and is consistently critiquing us to help us move forward, which is brilliant. The project has also brought, and will continue to bring, a unique collaboration of partners. Within there, which I don't believe that you see, is an organisation called Dark Matter Labs, who are architects by nature, but they actually look at design and systems change. And one of the key aspects of our foundations is an establishment of a many-to-many governance structure. I'll expand on that a little bit later, and then you'll start to understand why it's so important, because when we're trying to provide solutions, we first need to understand the problem framework, and then we need to build an equitable transition. And by doing that, we need to create a governance structure that facilitates that kind of equity. Perfect. So then we proceed on to the mission statement. So in essence, the River Don project is exploring the innovative potential of modelling and demonstrating the future rights of nature. What you'll start to understand that a lot of the future rights of nature has a lot less to do with legal mechanisms and a lot more to do with relationships and being. So a part of that is aiming to model, nurture and demonstrate the rights of nature through emergent technological, social, legal and economic governance frameworks. I'm going to say a few words. A lot of them won't necessarily make sense. I'll expand them on a little bit later when I give you some case examples within our working groups and how that will look. So an AI-informed self-sovereign agent entity. In essence, that means that what we wanted to do when we look at our relationship with nature is to treat it as an active participant within that interaction, not something that's divided or separate, something that's an asset that we can exploit, but actually engages with us in the everyday. Something that we're looking at as an asset-based community development, a river health engagement platform, a relational accounting registry, care tokens, and stewardship innovation. So what we're hoping to do is demonstrate into a transition. Just give me one little moment, because my notes are constantly moving around on my screen and I can't seem to get them in the right order. So apologies, I'm back. So the River Don as a place in which the compounding challenges we face intersect. And what I mean by that is we have a planetary problem that you can feel at a local level. And that will be felt in very different ways dependent on the place. And that will be felt in very different ways from a political economy perspective, from a social perspective, from a global north-south divide, even when you look at Sheffield in that sense as well, depending on whether or not you're up catchment or down catchment. And through the River Don project, we intend to demonstrate how our ontologies, or way of being, and civic infrastructures can be shifted from a worldview of separation to one of relational, multi-agent interdependence. We hope, or we intend to demonstrate how the rights of nature could be incorporated into new civic infrastructures and nurture that transition ahead. A demonstrated project, essentially, is a set of projects or networks or platforms or a combination which show how innovations and future system capabilities and civic capacities could operate to bring about change, which is proportionate, and that's the key aspect of it. It's proportionate to the challenges that we face. So they shine a light on how we can address the transitions ahead. And a part of those questions are based around the climate transition, just an equitable transition, a transition around well-being, for example, a regenerative economy. Now, I don't have to really explain to most of you as to why we need to do this, but a part of that conversation that we had quite early on in the River Don project in particular at Opus is our perception of why this existential risk occurs. One of the conclusions, because there are many variables in this, is the value that we place on the environment is anthropocentric and is therefore treated as an exploitable asset. And we believe that what valuation, again, not to suggest that everybody has that evaluation and that everybody interacts with their local environment within that framework. But unfortunately, with the decision-making processes that we have, and I'll continue to explain that in a little bit more detail, it's a destructive, exploitative, and it causes or has a consequence of a climate crisis. So we therefore need to invest in new frameworks of value and valuing to discover and create interventions. And a really nice visual, I say nice, it's not really the best word for this, a stark visual of the current situation is from the Stockholm Resilience Centre. So you can see how we're exceeding near enough every biosphere limit. And one of the questions that we ask, so I'm going to hopefully frame this in the social science macro thinking, is that we believe our collective intelligence systems, where there's generator functions or behaviours, have allowed or facilitated this existential risk. So we're pursuing towards an unprecedented planetary scale meta-crisis in an age of consequences with increasing catastrophic and existential risk and locally felt impacts. To be fair, I never promised that this is going to be a fun or light-hearted presentation, but I'll try and go through it as best I can. So the initial topic of contention is collective intelligence. So what do I mean by collective intelligence? Well, essentially they're a set of systems, and in many ways, some are incredibly good. Some, unfortunately, are creating self-terminating outcomes. So I'll give you two examples which we currently operate in. Democracy is a collective intelligence system. A significant strength of democracy is that it can be incredibly inclusive. That can change and will change over time, so we should never really rest on our laurels in that context. But that in of itself has both opportunity and restrictions. And one of those restrictions or weaknesses is that it's notoriously difficult to do long-term planning. And you can see that with election cycles and promises and the way that power operates within that. Another collective intelligence system are market-based systems. Now, we obviously live within a market-based system, capitalism being that one of them, or the market-based system, and there's different modalities to that. And it can take many forms. A significant strength is it's incredibly efficient in attributing financial value and pricing commodities. However, a significant weakness of that is usually how that value is placed. So when we're talking about financial value, it's usually done as a substitute good. So we place a financial value to labour power and to natural resources, as an example. And unfortunately, or in ecological economic terms, you can't substitute a dead fish with money because you can't bring that dead fish back to life. So really, we need to start to critique these collective intelligence systems. Again, a part of the question is, why am I talking about collective intelligence systems during the Rights of Nature presentation and the perception of climate change? And an example or a reason for that is because we believe that worldviews and our understanding of the current problem needs to be reframed. And this is the framing that we're pursuing in essence. We're suggesting that we're unfortunately stuck in this cycle of narrow boundary goal setting. We can't see the wood for the trees. A part of that explanation is that we're experiencing a permacrisis. a polycrisis, and a subset for both of them is the metacrisis. Don't worry, I'll go into the explanation of these three. And we need to acknowledge that we live within a very complex reality, and we need to transition towards a wide boundary goal setting. So we need to actually look at and understand the problem in a much wider narrative. The first framework that I'm going to look at is a permacrisis, and this was actually explained really well by Jackie, in the sense that we no longer have a once-in-a-generation flood. In fact, that occurs more frequently. So when we're looking at a permacrisis, what we're saying is that it describes the increased frequency and intensity of events. So another pandemic could be around the corner, another forest fire, another financial crisis, another flood. Unfortunately, the problem with the permacrisis is as it intensifies and occurs more regular, our ability to react is reduced significantly. So if we're taking the example of a flood, the biodiversity loss, the loss of life, the loss of the economy, etc., and the cost that it takes to even manage a once-in-a-generation flood, well, that becomes more common. And during every event, our capacity to heal is reduced, and our ability to react is reduced, and therefore you have a compounding impact of these events, and they become unmanageable. So we really need to start thinking about how we build resilience into the very responses, because that window of opportunity will close. We then proceed onto a polycrisis. So here we have to hold complexity, and we have to understand that we're in internet-connected worlds and an intersectional reality. We used to believe that we can affect a problem in a linear way, so we could make an intervention here, and you'd be relatively assured that that intervention would lead to a preferred objective or outcome. However, due to social, economic, ontological, technological, and scientific developments, we are idealizing with lots of problems that are intertwined. And I'll give you one example of this. We're currently experiencing a housing crisis in the UK, and what we will hear from our politicians and what we will hear from the narrative is that we need to build more housing. But when you look at this in a polycrisis perspective, well, actually that's just utilizing more resources. We're emitting more carbon. We're continuing to extract more for less in that essence. So actually, when we're looking at a solution to one problem, which is a housing crisis, we're completely mitigating the compounding effect that that has across. So we need to have honest discussions about not only what the problem is, but what potential solutions could be that we previously wouldn't consider. So you really need to sense into that complexity and sense into the effects of those problems, so you know how to adapt to them and what the next steps could be, with every solution being intersectional. So then we go back to the metacrisis, and this really has three segments towards it. So this is the generator functions that I was referring to earlier. So that way of being, that collective intelligence system. We believe that under capitalism, you currently operate under extractive logics. So these are perverse economic incentives, where we have not placed value over a live tree, but instead only done so once it is dead. You couple that with unaligned exponential technologies. And as I was talking about those technologies, my screen just froze, so excuse me. So you couple that with unaligned exponential technologies. And I just wanted to raise something called the Jevons paradox. And that occurs when technology progresses and it increases in efficiency, with which that resource is used. Now, usually we'd go under the premise that's brilliant because we can use less energy to provide those goods. What actually happens is because of the cost of the use of that energy and the extracted resources, it increases the use of that resource. And that therefore creates further demand and therefore further pollution, etc. We also operate under rivalrous dynamics, which leads to the securitization of resources and a race to the bottom, if you like, which is incredibly problematic when we're dealing with a finite planet. So these behavioral functions, as highlighted, with conjunction of a polycrisis and permacrisis, are actually creating a self-terminating system. Again, across Europe, parties are clamoring to build more houses. And if we were to be elected, what they don't have that conversation is that actually we are capped at 176,000 homes across Europe if we want to hit the Paris Accords. We're not having that conversation. We're in fact creating false promises under a very short term and narrow boundary goal setting system. So now we go back into the River Don project, and this is in no way, shape or form suggesting that we can resolve those crises that we explained, but we want to take you on a journey of a possibility of creating or poking or provoking a different way of being. So we really want to change our mindset, and we're not really reinventing the wheel in this context. I mean, if you look at Brittonic and Celtic cultures, they personified nature and had an interdependent relationship to it. If you ask anybody who commits to citizen science or who works within the Environmental Agency or other organisations that care for their local environment, they understand the active participation between nature and themselves. They understand that they're a part of a wider ecosystem. But as a society, we don't necessarily place that value. What we would like to achieve is something that our colleagues over at Donut Economics are trying to attempt to highlight, is finding that sweet spot where we manage to implement social needs, housing needs, well-being needs, but implement it in a way that's within the limitations of a biosphere. And the question that we have is, okay, how do we hit that sweet spot? How do we have these honest conversations? Now, we've currently got 5 concurrent strategies. So I'm going to go through these a little quickly because I want to speak a little bit more to our working groups, because that's actually what's most exciting. So we want to be multidisciplinary in our ecology, regional, international organisation and actors. We want to develop an AI-led interface for care and an engagement platform, which I'll speak to in a little moment. We want, through a range of asset-based community development, to look at arts and culture approaches and interventions and co-create a river rights declaration and stewardship agreements. This, in essence, is actually highlighting and bringing to the forefront what already occurs amongst community groups. We also want to then, through that co-creation, create a river rights declaration and turn it into a legal mechanism, a bylaw proposal at present. And then another phase of that is to deploy new multi-agent legal, economic, stewardship and governance frameworks. And again, as I go over, I'll explain it a little bit. This is the visualization of that many-to-many contracting that I was referring to earlier, that's really built within the foundation of our project. So we don't go from one-to-one or one-to-many where we contract somebody to complete a service. We actually have a mission statement at the centre, and people then come and engage with us within that contract. And that contract is formulated around that mission statement, and nature will be a part of that conversation. We have a structure to our organisation where we've got a collective governance group, a steering group, and the working groups or project holders in this. Here's a very quick visualization of that. Here's the steering group and its different projects that they work on. But more importantly, and because I know I'm going to run a little bit over, Luke, so I hope you give me a few minutes, where we look at the particular working groups. And I want to touch on the engagement platform. So the engagement platform is essentially a visualized layer of data. But at the initial phase, which we're developing now as a minimal viable product, you're going to have secondary data that monitor river health. And then another phase to that is have river sensors. You've got real-time understanding of that river health. But within that, you also have the opportunity through your own profile to submit your own data sets, incredibly similar to what was presented earlier as an opportunity for people to be involved in the protection of a local environment. And what you get to see then are multiple layers of data, both within an ecological mindset, but also an artistic and cultural perspective. So you can also upload audio clips, videos, for example, poetry, and your emotions around that relationship that you have with the local environment. So you create quite an interesting data set. Now, what's quite exciting about that platform is that you can then weave that real-time data and secondary data, hot and cold data, and feed it into an interface, which is a machine learning chatbot. And what you do is then you take something that's quite playful, where you can speak to a digitalized version of a river, to something that actually can speak to you back with its own data and say, well, actually, I'm not feeling too well today because I've observed that the dissolved oxygen rates at this part of the river have reduced, or actually we've had an increase in turbidity. Would there be any chance, because we know through geolocation that you walk past that part of the river, that you could take some photographs to evidence why that increase in turbidity has happened? So really what we're trying to do there is bring to the forefront the stewardship and the nature contracts that already occur, but within a very seamless technological digital manner. And again, at the initial stage, it's playful. You know, we want to say that this is obviously not the real representation of a river, but you can communicate with it. And not only can you communicate with it, you can be asked for a call to action. And then you feed into a larger data set and an ecology of ecological citizens, if you like, who contribute for their own way. And then we can then contribute to the restricted and limited resources that a lot of our institutional organizations have, and hopefully support them in the monitoring and health. But really, the main purpose of this isn't just to look at the gap, but it's hopefully to create to instigate an ontological shift where people start to see their local environment, but also their place in that local environment, and the importance of their actions, but the importance and the consequences of inaction, not just within themselves, because we don't feel that this is an individual problem, but within the organizations, the infrastructure, and the governance at a wider level. And you can only do that really if you can visualize the problem and name it correctly. So the last slide, and I promise it's the last one, Luke, I wanted to leave you with this. We are the first generation to know the scale of the challenges that have been created by human activity on the planet. And we are one of the last that can deeply do something about it. It is now about how we collectively harness that, working boldly enough whilst being legitimate enough and doing so with care to demonstrate systematically, work in ecologies and with a thoughtful urgency. So I think it's about time we opened up to Q&A.
Thank you very much, Alban. Sorry, I lost my unmute there for a moment. That was great. And you've given us a tremendous amount of food for thought. And I imagine that a number of people in the audience will be wanting to listen back through the recording a few times to drink in that sort of rich density of the ideas that you're working with there. There was a question in the chat, which I think certainly encapsulates an issue that flows out of this. I mean, we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I was quite amazed at the AI sort of potential. And the question that's posed is, how do you avoid sort of subsuming the river into a sort of pseudo-human form, and doesn't it lose its riverness by being forced to speak? Just to sort of inverting that idea of, if it gets our attention, that might be a good thing, but does it do something to the river's being?
Now, I think that's an interesting question, and something that we grapple with, and I don't actually have the right answer or the answer for you, but what I can share is that a part of this journey, so a part of our understanding for rights of nature, became very convoluted in the sense that it's not actually just a legal mechanism. And the chatbot in of itself is an art and culture piece. So the provocation to be able to interact with a chatbot that has its own data sets and can communicate back with you in real time as its own health is playful enough, but has limitations. And we respect that. Just in the same way that if you go back to indigenous or cultural thinking to the Celtic and Brittonic communities, the personification that they had for their local environment was a human mind attempted to understand what they couldn't grasp. And that's okay, because that's part of this journey that we're going on. So what we're trying to hope to do is, by the purpose of a demonstrator project, is that if you can create something new and take people on a journey that they've not been on before, you actually shift what's conceptually possible, because we don't even know the end point of this. One of the questions that could be quite interesting is that if you have enough data sets and sensors, you're able to understand in quite minute detail river health at present. If it's time-stamped and geolocated, you can do that over a longitude study as well. But then imagine if you then have like a planning permission for a particular part of that bioregion. What you can do then is model the consequences to the added pollutants, depending on what that project is, and say, well, actually, the river would like to say that it's going to damage the ecosystem to such an extent that we want to compromise between the human to non-human relationship. So again, that's more something of a provocation rather than something that we're aiming for, but dependent on the capacity that we have will depend on how far we can take it.
Okay, that leads into a question that's come into the chat, which is, what are the plans for moving this into other contexts and trying the sort of the AI approach in other schemes and in other scales? Is there anything that you're thinking of, or is there anything that you think might need to be changed in order to apply it in other directions?
Yeah, so actually we had a conversation today with an organisation called the Bioregional Learning Centre. So the premise of what we're doing, and this is going to be quite interesting when we develop the contracting for it, because essentially we're going to go to both universities and say, you don't own the intellectual property, because we want the intellectual property to be open source. Now, if you're adding a layer of data there as a professor, you can obviously block that as you're doing your research before publication. So it's not really the intellectual property of the data set in of itself, but it's of the coding. And because what we were hoping to do is say, well, this is a test case. So what we do learn of what goes wrong and what goes right, we can obviously improve that and reflect on that. But the premise of it is so it's scalable. So then people from Friends of the River Cam, for example, or the organizations from Love Our Oos, they can take the same software that we have and apply it to their context and apply it to their own data set with their own nuances and understanding. So we really do not want to limit this in any way, shape, or form. We just want to be at a storage capacity to be able to highlight our independence. And really, we're using AI, and I'd like to say machine learning more so because it's not as developed as AI, to be playful, to be provocative, but also to communicate. So it's not Opus saying that the river health is negative. It's the sensors that are saying that, and then the chatbot is communicating it.
Any plans to involve local schools? Because I imagine they'd get quite excited by all this.
Yeah, so we're looking at a AHRC bid with Green Estates and Sheffield Hallam actually at this moment, where they're taking children from the local school to Green Estates and placing them in nature and educating them around nature, but also then with a lens of the rights to nature. So really trying to develop that understanding and that collection of interdependence from the beginning. And again, a lot of our work isn't new, and I want to be quite honest about that. We're essentially recognizing that we have a very primitive understanding of the complexity of this world. We've got medieval institutions that sort of like force our hand and limit our conceptions, but then we've got like godlike technology that we're not utilizing in the right way. So the questions that we bring is how do we use that technology in a way that shifts these institutions and changes it to something that we need to make sure that that transition is equitable and right? Because one of the challenges that we have is, imagine if you were going through the industrial period, you didn't know the consequences of those actions. Just in the same sense that we're going through a green transition now, we don't want to leave it too late to have a knee-jerk reaction. We want to create demonstrators to say, well, actually, when things hit the wall, we've got different ways of thinking, different modalities and different attempts that we've done with academics to try and understand whether or not this is the right avenue to pursue.
I'm almost hesitant to ask this question because I know that it could fill up a whole day's debate, but I'm going to do it out of respect to the questioners who've raised it. But just feel free to keep it brief. Are you advocating legal personhood for the River Don?
Yes and no. So I'll be as brief as I possibly can. We see the legal mechanism as only a route to the end of that journey, and we don't even know where the end of that is. We understand that there's already legal protections in place for our local environment, but for one reason or another, and many reasons altogether, they're not adequate enough. So by us pursuing legal personhood, which is a part of our theory of change, by add, we recognise that it will be a significant step forward, but not the end product itself, because even if we have those legal mechanisms and the protections in place, if we don't have a shift in ontology and being, it's almost irrelevant.
Okay.
Almost.
We'll leave it hanging there because, as I say, not in any way to cut you short, but I know it's a big issue. Thank you, Alban. That was great. Let's move on now to John and Julia, please.
Great, thank you.
I need to sort out the unscreen share, don't I? I know, no, that's fine. You're back on. That's great. John, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I was just saying thanks and thanks to Alban and Mel and Jackie and Jade for the presentation so far. It's really interesting stuff. And falling back a little on your trail for the whole evening as wild and wacky, because we're going to try something slightly different in this session. Just going to share. Can you see that?
Yep.
Great. So I'll just well introduce myself and let Julia introduce herself as well. So I'm Dr. John Bridge from Sheffield University, and I'm I was going to sound slightly further along some sort of pathway that Mel sort of described. She said she was a biologist who's become an environmental scientist and then was becoming something else. And I started as an environmental scientist, and I've going through that process of exploring or being dragged towards, not dragged unwillingly towards social sciences and humanities as part of this requirement that I think Alban sort of started to articulate, to be able to look at and understand and ultimately advocate for environmental systems and water in particular, which is my area, through a range of different lenses, not just the science, I'm afraid. I'm casting aspersions on my roots, but there's more to life than that, as we all know. And so what we want to introduce in this session is an attempt to do that as a collective within our landscape laboratory. So that's me. Julia, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Julia Udall. I'm a senior lecturer in architecture, but I'm also quite undisciplined in that I've been doing a lot of work over the last few years with artists and scientists and various kind of practitioners, really engaging in these kind of questions around climate change. So Mel and I recently developed a project called Snorkeling in Soil, which is kind of looking at getting architecture students to kind of think about soil as a more lively entity, and then John and I have been working together, particularly on a project called Lichen, which is a network of nature culture sites across Europe, particularly working with kind of artist and curator-led environments. Yeah, I think that's probably enough for now. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Julia. So yeah, in this session, we as I say, want to sort of have a think about how we can perceive water from a range of non-quantitative ways, and how we've formulated these into our landscape laboratory. But before we do that, we wanted to try something a bit interactive with you, and hopefully this will work on Zoom. But what we want by doing it, we wanted to sort of introduce one of the research methods that we've explored, and also to get you thinking about this idea of the connectedness of the hydrosphere, the connectedness of water, both as part of a wider landscape system, but also as part of our lives, our bodies, our individual existence, and our communities. It's this idea of connectedness, which is essential to perception, but is also essential to understanding how we can maybe move forward and work with water in a changing climate. So I'm going to hand over to Julia to lead this exercise and see if it works.
Great, thanks, John. So should we?
I'll work the slides.
Next slide, yeah. Please. So in working with these watery landscapes, we were interested in how scientific knowledges can be brought into relation with more embodied and situated forms of know-how. So to be thinking analytically and rigorously in a kind of system scale, but also to be engaging experientially and effectively, expanding our practices of attention. And I think this relates a lot to things that Alban was saying. So this kind of notion of planetarity and kind of understanding these kind of scientific modes of sensing, but also these more emotional kind of approaches. I don't think, yeah, great. So Alex DeLittle, a sound artist, you see him here, an academic, introduced us to a range of sonic methods informed by practices of deep listening. So deep listening was initially developed by Pauline Oliveros, who later in her life moved from composing incredible electronic music to composing situations for listening. So now we're going to invite you to engage in a virtual listening sensitization based upon a score that Alex composed initially kind of with us in the landscape and kind of refined, and we've used together barefoot in the Little Don River. Okay, so I'm going to invite you to take a moment to make space for listening. Find somewhere or kind of place your body in a kind of comfortable way. And if you've got headphones, do use them if possible. You'll begin to hear a field recording from our journey along the edge of the reservoir to the Little Don River. I'm going to ask you to rub your hands together and start to feel some heat in your palms. So when they feel really nice and warm, place them over your eyes. Okay. Identify an area of water shallow enough to stand in. Remove your shoes and socks and find a stable place to stand in the water where at least your feet are covered. Spend a moment establishing contact with the ground. Spend a moment focusing on your breath. Gently and slowly expand your awareness to the sounds that you can hear in the environment, expanding your listening awareness to accompany all that you can hear without judgment. Now expand your awareness further to listen to your contact with the water, how it moves against your body. Notice similarities and divergences between the sensations of the water and your sense of the sonosphere. Now listen with your contact with the water while expanding your awareness to include all water sounds as far as you can hear. Whilst listening and sensing presently, close your eyes and try to imagine the energetic dynamics of this water system, its ebbs and flows. Using your sonic and somatic sense of the here and now to ground you, gradually try to expand your sense of the water system beyond earshot, upstream and downstream, following the course of the water as uphills across land and into underground networks. First, expand your awareness of the local catchment, holding your imagined sense of connectivity and flow with your current place within it. Expand gradually from here as far as your imagination will take you, downriver and out to sea. Eddies, white water, lapping, stillness. Your place in a global water system. Now release all effort, come back to your contact with the ground, bring your hands to your face and slowly open your eyes behind the palms.
I think that might have worked. Thank you, Julia. I know we're not all standing in rivers, but I hope to the extent that you were able to do that sitting wherever you're sitting, it's helped you at least to try and focus on a memory or an imaginative imagination of a time when you've been in the river. For me, I have to say, it was quite transformational when we did this actually at this site on the screen now. As I said, I'm an environmental scientist, so I had been, we've got a monitoring point for the water level in a stream just near to here, which I'd been going to regularly for 4 years as part of a project with the Sheffield Northern Wildlife Trust, Sheffield Landscape Partnership. and it had never occurred to me to take my shoes and socks off and actually stand in the river rather than just measuring it with a probe. And the uh, the difference in the way that I was able to, I mean, bring my sort of scientific understanding, also think about how that water in that space was connected, both upstream and downstream, but also out across the landscape, and indeed through my body and my experience and my imagination.
I think as well, it's worth saying we had a
go on.
picnic just before, and we were talking about kind of global disputes around water and the kind of politics of water in various places, and so I think that also was kind of brought with us into that kind of experience, and so a lot of the kind of places I was going, particularly in were those places that we just recently discussed. So those
it was a rich experience.
Yeah,
the whole range of different materials and thoughts which were brought to that. Walking over a site as a method of engaging with that site was something which, yeah, was demonstrated and extremely well interesting and eye-opening for me at that site, at that meeting. So that's one way of perceiving water and thinking about our connection with it. And water's, of course, intimately bound up with landscape. Once you start extending your perception of it beyond the river and beyond the banks of the river up and downstream. And in order to get to the river, rainfall has to make its way through and across the land surface. And in doing so, it shapes every aspect of that land surface. That geomorphological relationship between water and terrain is not fixed. The river creates the valley as well as flowing through it. It erodes soil and modifies slopes, sustains the organisms that are there and the pattern of habitats. And this is a nice map. I mean, it's quite a pretty map visually, but it's also quite informative from my point of view as an environmental scientist. This is the Upper Don catchment, the drainage basin, the watershed, the whole area of land which supplies the Don with its water and drains down through Sheffield and sometimes causes floods, and other times provides us with an asset flowing down through the centre of Sheffield. The colours on this map are modelled data. They're not from sensors. They're from a computational model based on scientific understanding of hydrological connectivity. So this is a measure of how efficiently water and the sediments and the nutrients or pollutants it carries can move across the landscape and down into the streams. And so although all this area contributes to the water, to the river, you know, not all areas are equal in terms of, not all parts of the landscape are equal in terms of hot spots, those red areas in this map, and sort of cooler spots, areas where water and sediment connectivity is lower. So this kind of visualization, both as a model and as a map, allows us to start to inform those kind of management strategies. But it also, for me, having just done that type of exercise, we've looked at where you're personally sensitized with the water. It informs that connectivity, that connection with every aspect of the water. When you're standing in the Langsett Reservoir or by the Langsett Reservoir in the north part of the region, you know you're connected somehow with what's going on in Loxley or down in the Sheaf and Porter as well. You're part of the same system. The other great agent of change in landscape is, of course, us as humans. And in this landscape, the Upper Don catchment, the Sheffield Lakelands, water has dominated that human intervention through the creation over the last 200 years or so of 16 artificial water reservoirs, which dam the river valleys, allow the storage and abstraction of water for use by the urban populations, but also fundamentally change and alter both the landscape character and the landscape function, the pattern of habitats, the pattern of land uses around them. So water here is an agent of human intervention, as well as a participant in the landscape and a recipient of pollution as well. The Sheffield Lakeland, by the way, was named by an inventive bus tour company in the 1950s, because of course these are not lakes, they're reservoirs, they're part of an industrial infrastructure, even though, as you see in this picture up at Langsett, they can look very, very aesthetically pleasing and very naturalistic, if you like, especially on a sunny day. I want to play you another short clip, which is another exploration, another way of exploring the landscape from a more humanities-based approach. So this is part of one of a series of dialogues between landscape artists and practitioners, thinking about how artworks can mediate the meanings that we find in landscape and help us to express and visualize those. So I'll play this. It's just about a couple of minutes long. Oh, that shouldn't have happened. That should happen.
John, we can't hear that, I don't think.
Can everyone hear that or not? No, you can't. That's a shame. I'll move on then. The conversation was between Alison Carty, who's the artist who created this work, and Keith Tompkins, who's program manager for the Sheffield Northern Wildlife Trust, and has been involved in leading the Sheffield Lakeland Landscape Partnership, which has involved the Environment Agency and Jackie and her colleagues, City Council, Yorkshire Water, and now Natural England and Sheffield Hallam University as well. And this landscape that he describes as he talks about this piece of work. So we saw it in sort of geographical form, if you like, in map form, in data form, a couple of slides ago. This is the view from, if you like, the Sheffield brand. This is the Sheffield Lakeland. It lies on the fringes of the Peak National Park to the west and the post-industrial conurbation to the east. It contains greenbelt and brownfield land. It's intensive farmland and commons. But certainly for many people in Sheffield and those who sort of Sheffield's reaching out to and trying to encourage to come to Sheffield, it's been promoted in recent years as the recreational space, the outdoor city. And this hides, if you like, it subsumes this deeply modified, hybridized landscape that's also functioning, has been co-opted to form this vital part of our water infrastructure here in Sheffield. So what happens to this landscape affects what happens to our water. So its resilience to climate change, its response to climate change is a fundamental part of our water security in the future, our water resilience. So in contrast to the branding, this is not a park. This is not a water park. Or it's more than a park. And a question for understanding landscape management is thinking about how how to deal with the water in a fair and an inclusive way as well, and the uses of the water and the users of the water. So in this talk, and actually, taking all three talks so far, we've sort of engaged with water in the landscape. Some people, political ecologists especially, call this a waterscape, which sort of tries to encapsulate the entwined natural social systems of the water landscape in a lot of different ways. We've had sort of data, quantitative sort of approaches, visual, sound recording, sensory, imaginative, geographical mapping based visualizations, engagements, artworks and dialogue. And as these narratives and counter narratives of, on the one hand, a hybridized infrastructure, part of an industrial system, and on the other hand, a recreational space. And it's important to try to capture these many different ways of knowing, because the waterscape exists in so many different forms. This diagram that's on the screen now comes from a recent project we worked on during COVID, actually, which was looking at how decision making around water landscapes might be improved, or might at least be informed by making visible a much wider range of knowledge, understanding and evaluation than is currently permitted in planning and management processes. On the wheel here, if you like, many of our ways of dealing with environmental issues now and of conceiving responses tend to reduce this kind of diverse way, the range of ways of knowing and expressing and constructing our understanding of the water system, the water landscape system. They reduce it just into this area in the bottom right side, the rational space, the objective measure, the constructed, institutionalized, evidence-based, transactionalized ways of knowing.
I guess we can see that the challenge is to kind of think about how to take responsibility for water in times of climate crisis. And really, I suppose our perspective is that we want to multiply the possibilities for engaging with it and ways of understanding it and desiring to care for it. We've established a transdisciplinary landscape laboratory whose objective is to do that. The lab is a space for academic research development within a 10-year management programme with the Sheffield Lakeland Partnership that brings together Sheffield Hallam University, Sheffield City Council, Natural England, the Environment Agency, the Wildlife Trust and Yorkshire Water, as well as kind of a series of kind of practitioners collaborating with us.
So yeah, this sort of evolving model that we've got for our grouping, our landscape lab, it's attempted to frame an agenda which is inclusive to, but not dominated by, those sort of positivist normative forms of knowledge. And we have established a landscape laboratory within a 10-year strategy. Those partners I've mentioned, the Yorkshire Water, Wildlife Trust, Environment Agency, Natural England, the Sheffield City Council and Sheffield Hallam, have set up this Sheffield Lakeland Landscape Partnership. You can see, sorry, on the right-hand side. What we want with the landscape laboratory, what we've been asked to do with the landscape laboratory, is to curate and analyse data and knowledge and production of research on this kind of coupled human environmental system of the Sheffield Lakeland to help inform their management of the landscape and the waterscape over the next 10 years or so. So we're trying to do this, as I say, in a way which doesn't simply depend on any one area of that knowledge wheel, if you like, that we saw in the previous slide. And the central question which we want to try to hold as we build that body of knowledge is this one at the top of our cycle here. How do we live well in this changing landscape? It's not about setting goals. Well, for us, for our research agenda, we're not setting goals or specific visions for the future, but it's trying to understand how we can identify where value is in this system, and how to preserve and promote that value to ensure a sort of maximum state for that human environment system, within which water is this fundamental connecting and shaping medium.
So we wanted to end by putting an invitation out to you, and I do hope at least some people will choose to join in. So inviting you to unmute your microphone and to share in reading out loud a piece from a text by Estrida Niemansis called Hydrofeminism, or On Becoming a Body of Water. So the text will be on the slides, and please don't worry if we're slightly out of sync. I think that will be kind of part of the enjoyment. Great.
Okay, here we go.
Even whilst in
Constant motion, waters as a planetary archive of meaning.
Meaning and matter. To drink a cup of water is to ingest the ghosts of bodies that hold that water.
When nature calls, sometimes later,
we return to the cistern
and the sea.
Not only our antidepressants, our chemical estrogens, or our commonplace excretions, but also the meanings that permeate those materialities. Disposable culture, medicalised problem solving, ecological disconnect.
And let's say, oh,
just as the deep oceans,
particularly records of former geological eras,
anthropomorphic secrets, even when we would rather forget. More immediate past are returned to us, both tricklers and floods.
Both trickles and floods.
And more immediate paths are returned to us in both trickles and floods.
And that same glass of water,
and that same glass of water will facilitate our movement, growth, thinking, loving, as it works its way down the esophagus through blood, tissue to index finger, clavicle, left ensures that our being is always a becoming. An alchemist, as once profoundly wondrous and entirely banal, to guide our bodies from young to old, from here to there,
from potentiality
to actuality,
translation,
transformation, plurality proliferates.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, John and Julia. We've done some pretty weird things over the years in the Space and Place group, but I think that takes the biscuit. So thank you for taking us there. I hope everyone feels suitably plural as a result. I'm looking on the chat. I just had one question, which I'll dive in with. You showed that sort of promotional picture for Sheffield, the outdoor city kind of brand. Do you think Sheffield has a closer relationship, a greater awareness of its water environment than other cities? Or do you think and if it does, is it because it has to, because of the way in which the city is absolutely sculpted by these multiple rivers running through it? Or is there something Sheffield-ish about a connection to water, or isn't there a connection to water in Sheffield as you perceive it?
That's a very tricky, but I mean, there's probably as many answers to that question as there are people in this room, and then as people you ask. I mean, it depends. I certainly know of students, for example, who may have been in Sheffield for 3 years and haven't realised there was a river there. And I don't think it's just students. I think certainly from a tourist point of view, my interest, I was looking at that the cartoon we put up there, and it took me a while to realise that there isn't a reservoir actually shown on it, which is odd because for me they are the fundamental components of the landscape that makes certainly the outdoor city. You can't miss them, or maybe you can, but if you're not looking for them. I think obviously when we have the floods that Jackie referred to at the start, when they happen, everyone is aware of water. I think one of the tragedy of the commons as applied to water, probably a slightly mashed up reference, is that as soon as it goes away, you forget about it. We have a complex relationship where water is either coming out of the tap on demand and then turning off and disappearing, or it's forcing us to leave our homes or change the way that where we're driving. There's very little, or we're sailing boats on it or fishing in it. I think that people have a very complex and fragmented relationship with water.
In the chat, John Blewett has asked for permission to speak, and I am prepared to grant John Blewett permission to speak if he would like to speak.
Just 2 minutes. Just 2 minutes. I lived in this city 75 years, and the relationship to water depends on where you live.
Mm.
The River Don is still the dirty old Don. It has been for the last 70 years, and it still will be. There's no saying about Sheffield, but they say it's a wonderful photograph. It's a wonderful frame. Let me get this right. It's a dirty photograph in a wonderful frame. And the rivers around Sheffield are wonderful. People disregard them. They don't look after them. They throw things in them, and until you get that attitude changed, all the words under the sun will not do what you're trying to do. And I agree with what you're trying to do, because I'm trying to do the same thing. I've walked up and down these rivers for the last 70 years, and about putting your feet in is true. You can be intimate with a river, depending on what it is, but you can't be intimate with the Ladies' Bridge on the Don in the middle of town, because it just doesn't advocate that. Lovely to sit in a little stream in a gloaming, but not very good on the Don in Ladies' Bridge. But you've got to get the people on the ground interested. If you don't get them interested, you'll be battling against it. Alaban are smashing what he said. Everything's true. It's a thing we've been advocating for years. But the relationship with the rivers is like you said. If the water comes through, there's a danger. You don't have to look at the River Don. It's been condensed. It's been bricked up. It's been channelized for the last 500, 600 years. And that's where we don't like it. They don't like the river. The river's done what it had to do. It created the industry. Now it's finished. Now we've got to find another thing for it. We've got to look after it. And that's all I'm going to say.
Oh, great.
Over to you, Luke.
Thank you for that contribution there. That introduced a lot of really resonant themes, I think, there. And yeah, much of the water in the city is not really something to gaze upon as a thing of beauty, or it's culverted and you don't notice it's there at all. So we've had a lot of images concentrating on the sort of the countryside aspect of the water catchment zone, but you've helpfully, John, brought it into the city centre, and I think it raises some interesting issues there. So thank you for that. I think, folks, I'll move us along to our final presentation now. So I need to just share my screen. This is a recorded presentation from Andre Kong, and I know from having dummied this up that I have to sort of tee it up in a slightly inelegant way, because it starts anyway. I'll just do it, and you'll see why I'm doing it the way that I'm doing it. Right. So let me get this done right. No, it's not that one. It's that one. Right. Can you see a video loading up?
Hi, I'm Andre Kong, founder of Andre Kong Studio. Firstly, I'd like to apologise for not being able to be there in person this evening, but if you have any questions about my presentation or are interested in learning more about our work, please do contact me. So I'd like to also thank Luke and Sheffield Hallam University for their invitation to talk about our work within this extremely interesting and diverse panel. So let's get to it. Our presentation is called Stories in Space, Inhabiting the Data of Uninhabitable Futures. And we're going to examine 3 of our recent projects, proposing that spatial design and architectural installations can enhance awareness of current and future challenges posed by climate change and also related environmental damage. How can we make data more tangible? How can we inhabit data and actually tell its story? And how can we engage communities for meaningful change? Our approach is playful, informative, and accessible. We're going to go through projects chronologically, as each of them has influenced the next. We're going to go through a cautionary benchmark, seesaw, and whale in the room. But before we start, I'd like to give you a bit of context about our studio's values and what we aim to achieve when we're designing. We believe that storytelling can move mountains. We tell stories through architecture and design to convey messages that are larger than our own work. We're led by site-specific ideas and processes, not style. Solutions should be simple. We believe that the power of design to solve problems, both big and small, but only if solutions are clear, actionable, and unpretentious, with equal measures of pragmatism and idealism. There is beauty in play. We love design that is playful, expressive, and delightful. Design that balances and contrasts, dreams, and inspires. That's where we find fresh beauty. The future is now, the future is local. We look to the past for clues to our future. We explore local materials, processes, and technologies that we can combine to unlock new ideas and build tomorrow's traditions. And lastly, but definitely most importantly, for people and planet. We value people, we value communities, and the planet that we share. Our design focuses on creating better, diverse, and inclusive places for everyone to enjoy without harming the environment. So the first project that we're going to look at is called a cautionary benchmark and is set in the Royal Docks in London. This was done in 2022. Humanity stands at a tense and distressing crossroads. While most people now acknowledge climate crisis is an existential threat, its sheer magnitude leaves individuals, corporations, and governments struggling to grasp how to radically change their behaviors. This is particularly true for the construction industry and the built environment, with both of them jointly being responsible for almost 40% of carbon emissions worldwide, where change is just not happening fast enough. It's therefore crucial to continue raising awareness of the risks of frequent storms, droughts, and sea level rise, and finding ways to do so that are more effective. In today's constant flurry of pervasive flashing images on social media and advertising, the message is often lost, or its scale is overlooked. Marshall McLuhan said that the medium is the message. Offering a form of action and path to progress within protest is always more powerful than merely shouting about the issue alone. In our recent project for a public bench entitled A Cautionary Benchmark, we set out to highlight the physical scale of flooding level rise whilst offering a glimpse of hope being built by young students and using reclaimed materials. The bench intends to act as a cautionary tale, the same way that Greek tragedies did in the form of performance, so as to shape a communal behavior or attitude. It's set on 2 levels. in tension with each other, one for use today and the other still unreachable, the level you might be sat at during a severe tidal storm in the Royal Docks in 2030, 2.6 meters above high tide level. Data from Climate Central showing predicted change in level of storm floods with the modeling tool, where you can predict levels based on different parameters and timelines. We used this and were amazed by the change in level and wanted to really visualize this problem and make people understand the magnitude of the problem, a little bit like inhabiting a real bar chart at 1-to-1 scale. The lower level invites passers-by to sit and look out onto the water and London City Airport and contemplate on the level of the bench looming above. A tangible human experience is produced across the two levels of the bench and the rising water that it fronts, urging you to join in on the climate action against the crisis. The structural bracing creates an arrow that points to the structure's taller side, indicating the climate's worrying trajectory. The gradient colouring of the bench from pure metal to red is reminiscent of the colour staining of cumulative high-level watermarks and suggests this increasing level of risk that reinforces the urgency of acting now or never. The interactions with the bench are hoped to create meaningful individual experiences that will contribute to combating a collective challenge, similarly to Greek tragedies where catharsis was evoked as a communal purification of emotion, resulting in feelings of renewal and restoration, giving new hope that is needed for action and change. The materiality and the language of the design borrows from its maritime and dock context, using galvanized pipes and standard connections as seen in the tidal basin pumping station or the Royal Docks pumping station and the Thames barrier itself. By using an existing system of parts, the design is modular and reclaimed parts sourced from a demolished building to minimize embodied carbon were reused. The metal we used came from this old mezzanine structure, giving new life to old materials. The project is set in front of a technical college for design and engineering, and we felt that this project was not only an opportunity to raise awareness for the next generation of adults who will graduate into tackling our climate crisis, but an opportunity to collaborate on a project that is theirs to use, to care for, and to reflect upon, inspiring students to design exclusively in sustainable ways from now on. So we collaborated with a group of young adults at this college to actually build the project in the local workshop and then just take it all the way in front of the college for installation. Building this together with the local student community made it a much more powerful project with further impact in each of those students' development and legacy. When the bench was dismantled a year later, the materials were donated to the college and they were reborn in the form of student projects for which we were mentors, including a new bench on the same site. Initiatives such as these that were enabled by the London Festival of Architecture provide precious platforms for new voices and emerging practices like ours to spotlight action born out of the discontent with the status quo and plant seeds for ongoing change in the wider industry. So next we're going to talk about Seesaw, an interactive hammock structure made from rescued fishing nets. This is part of an educational project for young people on Governor's Island in New York City. It aims to raise awareness of ghost nets and their impact on delicate marine environments, orchestrating a collective balancing act. It's part of Beam Camp, an organization that operates a bit like a summer camp for young people from disadvantaged communities in New York, but actually pays them a salary to attend and learn skills to build projects designed by artists and architects. So we set off by asking ourselves some questions that led us to our idea. How can young people make a difference while having fun? How can we raise awareness and tackle the issues of ocean pollution? And how can we create an immersive structure with movement, sound, and color? So Seesaw is an interactive and immersive structure. Campers came together to learn and have fun building this radial structure of 6 seesaws connected by spectacular draping hammocks made from rescued fishing nets, which move in wave-like motions reminiscent of the sea. The project raises awareness of the challenges posed by ocean pollution and paves the way forward by reusing these ghost nets that pose threats to marine ecosystems. The seesaws move and the canopy above moves with it. This creates an immersive experience of being under the nets, moving up and down like the ocean surface. Ocean pollution is one of the many toxic parts of the complex challenge of the climate emergency. Its impact will have a visible and real impact on the future lives of campers and other young people worldwide unless attitudes and behaviors change now. Ghost gear includes nets, ropes, fishing rods, hooks, and traps abandoned at sea. As these items are designed to trap animals, they're very durable and they can cause serious damages to the marine ecosystem. Animals get tangled in discarded fishing gear, attracting other animals that get tangled up as well, and that creates a deadly cycle called cyclic catching. Abandoned nets are amongst the greatest killers in our ocean, as most are made of non-biodegradable synthetic fibers and can endure in the environment for long periods and therefore continue to catch fish for hundreds of years. So we work together with Ghost Diving USA to source nets from the ocean and then to be cleaned and reused as hammocks in our project. With Seesaw, we invite campers to jointly effect change by building, by moving, and by choreographing sound and movement within the installation. The project's all about collaboration, balance, and making waves, collaborating to build a structure, creating synchronized wave effects through collective balance, and figuratively making waves by raising awareness of one of the many problems of the urgent climate crisis which we are in. These are other photos during the build of the young people putting up the nets on the seesaw and then finally enjoying them once the piece was ready. This structure has been used as an anchor for community events and for families and Beam Centre youth. Like a cautionary benchmark, we hope that the involvement of young people in building something with an environmental message and mission raises awareness and becomes a value that they can carry with them later on in their lives, spreading the story and message to different places and communities beyond the scope of this project. Lastly, I wanted to discuss Whale in the Room, a project that has just finished being exhibited last week at the Newlyn Art Gallery and the Exchange in Penzance, and that will soon be reinstalled in Nottingham at the New Art Exchange. Whale in the Room is an installation commissioned by the Newlyn Art Gallery and the Exchange in Penzance that serves as a stark reminder of the pressing issue of marine plastic pollution and its devastating impact on sea life and coastal ecosystems. 8 million pieces of plastic pollution make their way into the ocean every day. 12 million tons of plastic are dumped into the ocean every year. 80% of all studied marine debris is plastic, and 100,000 marine mammals and turtles and 1 million seabirds are killed by marine plastic pollution every year. These staggering statistics made us kind of want to tell this story and really make it accessible to people. 12 million tons of plastic are dumped every year into the ocean. That is 13,877 tons every day, which is the equivalent of 380 kilos per second. So we wanted to create a design and an installation that flashed once per second, like a metronome, keeping track of time, that explained and exposed the fact that 380 kilos of marine plastic from Cornwall were being dumped in the ocean every second. And we wanted this to not only be a message to people, but also a community forum for voices of the local fishing community to discuss the issues within Cornwall and how they're affecting the population. So really, it's a call to action. We were inspired by whales' presence, their scale, volume, and shape, as well as fishing nets and the texture and colors of marine plastic debris to create this piece. The 380 kilos of plastic retrieved from the sea by Clean Ocean Sailing, a Cornish organisation dedicated to cleaning expeditions, vividly represents the amount of plastic waste that enters the world's oceans every single second. Clean Ocean Sailing were founded with the aim of cleaning Cornish coasts and ocean sustainability under sail and raising awareness about ocean plastics. They restored their 113-year-old wooden sailing boat to carry out this mission. It's called a net. And with the help of the net and other smaller crafts, they sail and paddle to remote, inaccessible places to clean up the coast by collecting plastic from the shores, sorting, recording, reusing, and recycling them. Their incredible mission is facilitated by volunteers who make a real difference to wildlife and the environment and make new friends, learn new skills, and make the world a better place. They were so helpful and excited when we approached them with this idea and helped turn it into a reality. This immersive hanging piece, comprised entirely of found marine plastic suspended with fishing nets, represents those 380 kilos every second. To underscore the urgency of this problem, strobe lights rhythmically flash onto the suspended marine debris, effectively acting as a metronome for the alarming pace at which pollution is infiltrating our sea. This is the 12 million tons of plastic every year, which are each million ton is represented by 12 seats around the space. The process of installing was almost like a reverse archaeological process, placing each individual item in a place to create a composition that invites viewers to walk around and underneath and imagine the stories of each object that is within the net. How did this bottle end up in the ocean? What about this plant pot? It was a careful assemblage of putting everything together and creating an atmosphere that could be both experienced from the outside and from within. It's only when one takes a seat in the 12 recycled plastic chairs arranged in a circle beneath that are symbolic of the physical weight that a transformable experience occurs. Sat in this forum, moments of discussion and reflection, visitors are able to literally see eye to eye with one another, gaining a clearer perspective not only of the piece, but also of the shared responsibility and collective action needed to confront the whale in the room. When viewers stand in front of the installation, their sightlines become entangled in the intricate web of fishing nets and plastic debris, symbolizing the hurdles and complexities of addressing the climate crisis. This shift in perspective underscores the idea that coming together and engaging in open dialogue facilitated by organized local community groups is key to finding effective solutions to the pressing issue of marine plastic pollution. And the whale in the room has done that precisely. It's served so far as a poignant call to action, stressing the need for collective efforts to combat the plastic pollution crisis. It encourages local communities to confront these issues head on, to address the whale in the room, and to cooperate in order to safeguard our oceans and preserve the diverse life that they support, including our own. This space has been widely used by Clean Ocean Sailing and many more organizations within Cornwall to come up with events that explain their mission to the wider public and recruit further volunteers to help on their mission. So, to conclude, we see the power of using spatial design to raise awareness and effect meaningful change in combating the climate crisis by telling clear stories that shine light on our environmental problems, allowing communities to see, engage, and work with reclaimed materials, to be inspired that there are different sustainable approaches for making the built environment. Thank you. This is the end of our presentation. Please do get in touch, follow us on social media, and follow updates of new projects that we're currently working on. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much and have a great evening.
Right, well, I'm very grateful to Andre Kong for producing that bespoke presentation. A lot of work went into it and a lot of insight, I think, there into the playful seriousness of their approach to design as a communication medium to sort of advance environmental awareness from a very powerful point of view, I think, but that's just my opinion. Obviously, we haven't got Andre to quiz and question via Q&A, but I'll just pause to see if anyone's got any comments that they want to sort of share specifically on that presentation. There's nothing in the chat, but I'll just give us a moment and then we'll open up to wider sort of general discussion as we round off this evening's affairs. So no comments. That's I'll say for the record, because Andre might listen into this, that's not a bad thing. You've stunned people into silence in a good way, Andre. It's not that they've fallen asleep. I can testify that people are still very much awake and got a lot out of your great presentation. So thank you for that. Okay, right. So moving on, final phase. Anybody got any comments they want to put into the chat or requests to sort of speak a view as we wrap this up? The one thing I just wanted to pick up on, slight provocation here, is for John and Mel, really. Almost each of you has almost apologized for being a scientist and having said that you've now moved on from that. You're sort of positioning yourselves as post-scientists. And I just wonder whether there's a reverse direction, which is, and perhaps invite Julia to perhaps comment on this, in hanging out with those scientists who now feel slightly awkward about being scientists. Do the more artistically inclined people develop a different understanding of what science can bring to the party, and is there a two-way journey going on here? So maybe if I fire that question to Julia, apologies for the
absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I found, and I think we discussed it a bit when we were developing the Snorkeling in Soil project, but it certainly kind of applies to other work and collaborations with John and others, is really about the different kind of practices and procedures of attention and noticing, and so thinking about questions of scale and relation in many different ways, and also kind of understanding I think that kind of question of engaging in processes of translation and trying to understand one another, and actually using those kind of processes of translation to kind of move both of your thinking on and kind of come together. So I think one of the kind of metaphors that came to mind is this idea of kind of bricolaging lots of things kind of together and understanding what this kind of new picture is that we put together. I think the landscape lab and particularly kind of people I've been very lucky to collaborate with in terms of the kind of scientific side of things are very good at that kind of process of translation and thinking about this kind of shared lexicon and what things mean across those things. I mean, I guess one of the things was really thinking about how we kind of map or think about kind of visual methods in relation to kind of design. I mean, maybe, yeah, I don't know if you wanted to say anything on that, Mel, particularly.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm gonna lean in on the label of a post-scientist, Luke.
I said it was provocative.
Not sure I'm down with that, but I do think it's really interesting because I think that as you become a scientist, I think that you have a lot of imposter syndrome, I'm sure, which isn't unique to being a scientist. And I think that working in a really interdisciplinary space almost makes you lean back in it a little bit more. And you're like, no, actually, I am a scientist. This is how I view the world. And due to working in science for so long, I see the world and I look at data and look at problems in, I don't want to say quite prescribed ways, or perhaps quite rigid ways, because that's how we have the due diligence, we get rid of bias and all these things. And I think that working in interdisciplinary spaces and having to sort of describe why you do the things that you do and sort of finding that common lexicon, like there are many people on this call that I collaborate with, and we all know that I spend most of the time asking people what words mean. But I think that that's really powerful because I think that it allows you to look at what you do from a different perspective. And I certainly have gained a lot from that in my practice. And I'm not sure if that answers your question, Julia.
I mean, I think, you know, some of the things that I've really enjoyed doing is kind of coming with you and Rachel into the labs and kind of understanding, yeah, what kind of matters to you, what how you kind of take care of things, what you're paying attention to. So yeah, absolutely. I think.
Yeah, and I think there's so much actually that we share that perhaps we don't realise that we share because lexicon gets in the way. And when I do work with artists, actually we do have a lot of commonality between us, and I think sometimes that can get lost in the boundaries that we put between disciplines, and quite often those boundaries are really artificial, but they are really strong because you have different lexicons and you have perceived different values, but actually there's a lot of similarity there. And I think that a lot of things are, again, like very synergistic. When we talk about mapping, like what I think of a map and what you think of a map are completely different, but actually when you bring the ideas of what I think of mapping and the things that I can bring to that process and what you can bring to that process, actually you make something that's better than some of its parts. And I think that, yeah. So can I just be a scientist plus? Can I be a scientist and? Please, John. Well, I don't know why I feel like I need Luke's permission, but turns out that's what we're doing today. Hi. Maybe we could workshop this outside of this forum.
It's just a riff we're exploring. I want to bring Alban in now because I know that you've been on a journey, Alban, in terms of your original disciplinary orientation and the world you're now swimming in. Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, no, I really value Mel's questions, to be fair, because it also sense checks it in my head in the sense of like, what do I actually mean by that? So there's a reality. So my undergraduate degree was politics and sociology, and I specifically focused on political economy. Actually, I did a year in Hong Kong looking at the situation there, and working on the River Don project is just added another, not even an interest, but a different frame. So my challenge with Mel usually is, okay, we have the natural sciences and we have that rigidity for a good reason. So we understand what the data is telling us. But then my critique is always, well, this predominantly is a social construct. And the question always from, as a political sociologist, is where does that boundary start and stop? What can and can't we change? How can and can't we change that? And actually now my master's is ecological economics. So that's taking the lexicon of economics and trying to redescribe that or redeliver that within the framework of the biosphere and environmental sciences. So actually the premise of ecological economics is we need to start to understand that the economy is a subset of society. It's a social construct with social interactions that have tangible outputs, but nonetheless, we decide how that operates. And both of those are a subset of the biosphere. So we need to really have approaches from different disciplines with different knowledges and knowledge bases, and say, okay, now we can actually start to understand that problem, because we're starting to not only communicate but understand each other's language. So yes, that's sort of like what I've got to add in that sense.
Great,
but
thanks,
it's difficult.
I'm going to carry on rolling now, and I'm going to suddenly widen it out to say, so far we've been talking to various types of intellectual or academic or whatever, and I want to ask, I'm not giving her much time to prepare for this, I want to ask Jackie what it's like, Jackie Lowe, what's it like hanging out with or involving academics and artists in your processes?
It's only 8 or 9 years since I finished my master's, so it doesn't feel that long ago since I was in academia.
Okay.
So I feel quite comfortable with it. It's nice to revisit this world because it's quite different to working in the Environment Agency. But because natural flood management, for example, are relatively new, I suppose it's been around for a long time, but being given this name, it's relatively new. We're really seeking this evidence base so that we can build a case to do a lot, bigger projects over a wider scale. So I think it's inevitable that we would come to the academics to help with that, and that could be social science, environmental science, or environmental management, like John does, or originally did. And I've had plenty of conversations with Julia, and it's great because it just makes you think about things differently. I'm also a trustee of Slow the Flow in a voluntary capacity. So Slow the Flow at Calderdale, natural flood management charity. And we always have an artist in residence as well. So we've had a painter, so natural flood management, that's all we do. But we've had a painter, we've just had a piece of music done for deep listening. We've not put that out yet. Just going back to what John and Julia played. So, we're all human, aren't we? We have all these aspects in our lives and they all touch our lives. But specifically from a project point of view, we need that evidence base.
And interestingly, you're illustrating the breadth of what counts as evidence and what is needed as evidence. So it's not just the techno-scientific stuff that's going to carry the day in terms of carrying the argument. It's a more inclusive. And sorry, I see that Alban's got his hand raised. So by all means, Alban, if you'd like to chip in.
Just actually a critique of academia in a sense is sometimes that it holds an illusion of legitimacy. So it doesn't have that gold certification that it is knowledge until you go through an academic structure. And I feel that some of the rights of nature, all of the rights of nature, thinking and conceptualizing isn't done in academia. And actually sometimes the challenge is legitimizing that kind of ideology or theory in an academic structure, which, it has to go through rigor, but there's not always a knowledge exchange occurring there. And I feel that sometimes is a barrier. I say this, and I really am fond of the universities. It's just, there's limitations.
Yeah. Well, I guess the closing comment to draw it all together would be we're all in it together, and therefore we're all only part of the solution. And if we can work together and be humble in front of other bodies of knowledge and accepting in front of other bodies of knowledge, maybe we'll get somewhere good. Was anybody wanting to make any final observations or? No? Okay, that's fine. I think we've done. And we've been on a journey, and thank you very much for coming on the journey this evening. Next event is in June. You can go to the same place where you signed up for this one to sign up for the heat event. And then we've got the education event in the autumn. But thank you very much. And hopefully see you all again at a future event. Okay. Thanks
for
very much.
Organising, Luke.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Luke. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.